All right. It looks like I'm live. So, this is for context the first time that I'm streaming to probably too many platforms at once. I'm just doing a check across all my screens. There's like five different copies of me lagging behind. I think LinkedIn is the
All right.
lagging
It
the
looks like
most.
I'm live. So this
And it was also playing the audio, and I don't want to have that happen. So, yeah, live is new for me, so definitely not my forte, but that's exactly why I'm doing it to get a little bit better at it. I can't edit the video after and stuff. I have to do everything all at once and try to appear natural and confident. So, good practice. Kind of like when I started making YouTube videos, totally awkward, but you got to start somewhere. I'm still always feel awkward when I film them, so live is hopefully just going to help a little bit. So this is on Twitter, it's on LinkedIn, it's on Facebook, it's on Twitch, YouTube. I didn't get TikTok set up in time, but maybe next time. So the topic, hopefully you can see it in the chat. I do want to put the chat on this video feed as well. Um, the topic is going to be the last newsletter that I posted. So um, if you haven't subscribed to my newsletter, go subscribe to it. But the topic is the third part of a three-part series. I wanted to talk over the past month or so about people trying to land jobs in software engineering, right? And the goal of the series was not to really focus like on how difficult it is right now in the in tech industry to get jobs, right? I understand that that's really complicated right now, especially for a lot of people. So, um, no, not to hyper focus on that. In fact, the goal of that was to get you focusing on the things that you do have some control over. So, the idea is that it's a three-part series, and the first part was focusing on what you can do to try and stand out, right? Like there's a lot of people competing for jobs. It's very difficult, obviously, to stand out. So the focus of that was what you can do that's in your control. And the next part of that, so 2 weeks ago now, that newsletter was about what you can do when you're doing your interview. Like what things should you be focusing on? So as a software engineer, I'm not a huge fan of LeetCode. I make this pretty known. But I think that if you're interviewing, especially in big tech, having some practice with LeetCode style problems is going to help. So try to give you some advice on things you can focus on when you're going through your interview, what's important. And then this third part today in my so what I'm going to talk about today and what my last newsletter was about is once you're hired, what does that look like? And just a shout out to Muhammad on YouTube. Hey there, good to see you. Thanks for joining. I should mention too, please ask questions in the chat, whatever platform you're on. It's if you've seen a screenshot or a picture of my desk setup, I have monitors in a like a basically across a wall. So I'm trying to look across all of them to see the messages coming in. Like I said at the beginning of this, I'm very new to streaming, so I will try my best to read the chat. I do want this to be interactive. Please ask questions throughout. I'll stop when I can get a breather to answer. So ask. That's the whole point. I kind of interrupted myself there, but the third part that I'll be focusing on today is what to be doing once you're hired. The reason that I structure this content in this way is that, in my opinion, going through getting a job in software engineering looks like three very different phases. And I'm oversimplifying it by bucketing it into three things, but I like talking about it this way because the different things that you focus on in these stages look different because you're trying to accomplish something different. So for example, I like talking about the LeetCode part. It's a little bit polarizing for some people, I get it, but I bring it up because you'll hear me say I don't think that LeetCode is a great way to practice being a software engineer. I don't think it's a great way. I think building software, shout out to John Cricket for his awesome newsletter. I think building software is the best way that you can practice being a software engineer. I think LeetCode gets you to practice a different set of skills. And it's not that that's bad, it's just that it's different. And when I talk about these three phases for going for jobs, I think that there's a place for LeetCode. Unfortunately, because I don't think it's a good translation into software engineering, but I think that there's a place for it. So the whole point of this is trying to get you to focus on different things at different points in the journey. Now, when I go into this third phase, when you've started working, so you've gone through the interview process, congratulations for getting your job. That's a huge accomplishment, right? Even if you are switching jobs, you've already been employed. It's very relieving to finally, you sign your offer letter and everything, you get to start. That part's relieving, but now you have a whole new set of exciting challenges to go work through. And that's what I want to talk about today. And I think it's important to address because some of the things that you've focused on leading up to this point, especially if this is new for you, some of the things that you're going to be focusing on, like all the LeetCode practice you were doing, it's probably just not really applicable at this point for a lot of people, right? Someone watching this at some point is going to say, Nick, that's totally inaccurate. LeetCode is definitely relevant for my job. Sure, and I'm not trying to say for no one it's relevant, but I think for a vast majority of people, the stuff that you're practicing leading up may not be relevant anymore, especially with the LeetCode part, right? I think system design stuff, depending on your the area that you're working in, like that can still be very relevant. But a lot of the stuff that you had to really focus and practice on specifically for your interviews may not be relevant. That's sort of an unfortunate side effect of how, interviewing is right now. I'll come back to this in a moment. Good morning, LeetCode versus master's degree. Which one is more weight for a job? I'll come to that in just a moment. The idea here, right, is what should we be focusing on once we get our job? So in my article, I'm trying to refer back to the article as I go through this because I framed it up this way so that I could chat through it properly. One of the things I wanted to address at the beginning before I start offering advice is calling out that, like, I'm not your manager. And I tried to frame it up this way in the article because it sounds a little bit funny, right? Of course, I'm not your manager unless literally you report to me at Microsoft, then I'm your manager. But the reason this is important to address is that the advice that I give you, right, in a lot of these contexts, a lot of it, it's difficult for me to generalize it for everyone, right? I can give you advice if you are reporting to me for the different things that I would expect, right? From my experiences, my biases, these are the things that I recommend. And I think for anyone creating content or trying to help educate, we all have this challenge where we have our own biases. But I think if people aren't acknowledging them, first of all, like, we all have biases, that's a bit of an issue. And the second part is that a lot of people hear the advice and they're not considering the bias. You need to be considering the bias. I can't tell you things and then you just say, well, Nick said it, like it must be fact. Like, absolutely not. You should be questioning it. You should be exploring it. You should be trying to see how it applies to you. So I wrote this in my newsletter, I'm Not Your Manager, because recently is actually very relevant timing for early in career mentorship circles. It's something we have at Microsoft. I had put off doing some of my one-on-ones with the mentees I have because of timing, right? I switched to a new team. I wanted to make sure I could dedicate as much time to that as possible. So some of the one-on-ones for my early in career mentees, they took a bit of a backseat, tried to communicate that a little bit. It's challenging, right? I want to make sure they have attention. So finally got those scheduled this week. It was awesome. I wish I had more capacity a little bit sooner to start them. But I realized this is my third time doing this with mentees. And I started to, hearing kind of where they're at and seeing if I can start giving them some coaching advice. And I'm realizing, like, for the first time, like, I got to be careful here because a lot of the topics that come up, these are people that are brand new in career, right? They've been at Microsoft for a few months now, but probably their first full-time job in tech, right? If they're asking questions about how do I interact with my manager, like how do I make sure I'm on track with my career, like how do I know that I have alignment with my manager, all these things, what do I talk about in one-on-ones? It's easy for me to say, if you were on my team, what I would expect, right? It's very easy. This is what I do for work. But I need to be careful with them to say, look, like, if if I don't know what your manager's like, if I don't know what your team dynamics are like, your working relationship with these different people, I need to be careful about what I suggest to you. And as a result, something that happens is that if I'm too careful, it's almost like my advice becomes so generic where they're like, what do I do with this? Right? So we have to kind of meet each other midway where I can say, like, look, if you know what some of my biases are, you know that I'm coming into this with my own perspective. I want to make it generic enough and applicable enough to you, but you kind of got to understand that and adapt what I'm saying to fit your needs a little bit, right? So I wanted to have that call out because I thought it was very relevant with this newsletter series I was doing with the early in career mentee one-on-ones. So, you know, I do want you to acknowledge that as we go through this. So even when I talk about the LeetCode stuff, right, that's kind of this next section to drill into a little bit, is that in my newsletter I was saying, look, like some of the stuff you did in the past two phases, which were getting the visibility, which were focusing on your interviews, some of that might just not feel applicable now. So going back to this question that's on Twitch, right? So good morning, LeetCode versus master degree, which one weighs more for a job? The interesting thing is, like, depends, obviously, right? Depends a lot, but I can tell you from my experience, right? For the people that I know that were trying to, they were applying to jobs, so not at Microsoft. I actually haven't hired people directly at Microsoft for transparency. The teams that I've been put onto, I was part of the hiring for staffing up those teams. So my experience will be prior to Microsoft, just for transparency. I've hired people that were very much, master's degrees. I think, I'm not sure how many PhDs, but this is a huge generalization. So I'm trying to be careful here, right? I have found that sometimes people focus a great deal on the academics, and there's nothing wrong with having like a lot of theoretical knowledge and academic background. Nothing wrong with that at all. The challenge, and it's the same thing with LeetCode, is that sometimes there is not a really good translation into working as a software engineer. And it sounds kind of funny, right? Like, hear me out, because I think a lot of us are kind of, maybe if you're new in career, you're going, well, or you're so new in career, you're not even applying for jobs yet. You're trying to decide, like, do I go the self-taught path, boot camp? Do I go for, a formal education? These are big decisions to make. Personally, I went for university, right? I was very lucky to have internships along the way. That meant that I could apply practically what I was doing. I think that was a huge asset, at least for me and how I like to learn. So when it comes to, these options that you can pick, like, I think you have to consider, number one, what value do you want out of that, right? Because for some individuals, it would be silly for me to say, oh, well, don't go for your master's, don't go for your PhD, like, no value in that. If you like to learn, if you enjoy the academic part of that, absolutely pursue that, right? It's not for me to say, if you enjoy that, don't go do it. Do I think that it translates very well into building software in teams? For my experience, from what I've observed, and for context, my experience is roughly, 2 years worth of internships plus 8 years at a startup, almost 4 years at Microsoft, so about 14 years of working in industry. My experience has been that people that hyper focus on the theoretical or formal education part, like hyper focus, right, beyond their bachelor's degree and so on, it can be challenging for them to see, like, we're not building perfect code all the time, right? You don't have infinite time to go work on something. We need to be shipping value. I've seen that come up many times where people struggle with that. On the LeetCode side of things, and I see some messages coming in the chat, so I'll come back to this in just a sec, because I want to make sure I can engage with you guys. But on the LeetCode side of things, right, it's again, like, it can be, not universally, I'm not trying to generalize too much, but it can be a false sense of confidence. And that's because I'm trying to think, I was thinking about this earlier. I wanted to come up with a really good example to walk through, right? When you are solving LeetCode problems, you are presented with a problem statement and you have to go implement code for it. Now, some of the things, if you're like, again, hyper focused on LeetCode, I've done a million LeetCode problems, I've solved every single one of them, cool. That can be really helpful for you practicing certain things, getting your problem solving going. So not trying to knock that. What you're not practicing is how are you communicating with stakeholders? How are you collaborating with teammates? How are you debugging other people's code? How are you doing code reviews? How are you coming up with design documents? How are you refactoring code? How are you rewriting projects or deciding whether or not you need to? There's so many other aspects to software engineering that you need to be spending time on. And I try to get at this in as much content as I can because I was chatting earlier with Anna Miller. We had a really cool talk, and it's going to go up on YouTube soon. Got to edit the bit of the video, but the it's really challenging to have people hyper focusing on so many of the technical skills, the content I put out online, right? I observe because I have analytics of things. I see the impressions, the engagement. I can put out some C# content. It can be very basic, and I will have lots of people going, "This is awesome! It's so helpful." And then I will put out something that says something along the lines of, "I think that as someone who's been in industry for 14 years, I've been managing people for like roughly 12 years. I think that communication is one of the most underrated software engineering skills." No one seems to read it. No one seems to care. And I'm going, people, like, this is so important. I don't know how to make this more obvious, right? So I'm going to check the chat now. Sorry, I'm terrible at multitasking because I'm just not used to doing this. But transitioning from senior developer to software architect, transition tips. Yeah, I'll try to come back to this because I think that might be more relevant kind of going into more of the meat of this. I see a lot of bachelor's and master's finishing universities, even computer science. They have a really, really hard time being a good developer because their unis were not focused on the right skills. Absolutely. I do agree with that. I think the university which finished, shout out to Faculty of Information Technology in Mostar, was quite balanced technical and theoretical knowledge. Awesome. Otherwise, I would think I would not have finished it. So this is really cool. Thanks, Mohammed, for this comment. I've shared this with a couple of people, right? I went to the University of Waterloo. When I was in high school, like as a kid and stuff, I loved to program. Like once I learned how to do it, I was like, this is the coolest thing. And I didn't know exactly like what I wanted to do when I like grew up. I want to have a software company. I'm gonna or a technology company, right? Not even a software company. My father owned a company. I'm like, I have to do that. Like I'm gonna do that when I grow up so I can be like my dad. It seemed like the thing to do. But I knew I liked to program, and I just remember my father said to me when I was younger, "Hey, like all of the money's in hardware." And I was like, "Well, that's awesome. I don't know anything about hardware, but I do know software. So if I go to university and I go for computer engineering, maybe that's a good balance, right? I'll get exposed to some of the hardware stuff. I can lean on the software stuff. Cool." Now, I go to university. In high school, I was pretty fortunate. Like I didn't have to try hard, and I had like 95 and everything. So cool. That was nice. And then I went to university. I was almost failing every single thing. I hated university. I could not stand class. It felt, for the first time in my life, like school was always easy without having to try. And I got to university and I was like, what is happening right now? Like, why can't I pass? Like, why does it feel like I can't pass anything? I'm struggling so hard, and I've never had to do this before. And I remember going through this like every semester in school, like kind of scraping by. I think we had to have like not an 80 average. I think it was a 70 average. Was like if you had below 70, you weren't getting honors, and because it was an honors co-op program, like then you would fail out. I think you could fail like or have two classes below that or something. I can't remember the details, but for me, I was like, oh, that should be easy. Like I'm used to having 90s and stuff. And I remember going through and being like, this is awful. And I actually don't know if I can do well at this. But what saved me, to Mohammed's point in the chat, was like, I went through internships, and I had 6 internships. Every single time I was like, and it was software, not hardware. I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. I know that I want to be building software. I don't care what industry it's in. I don't care about the school. Finish it. I just know that I want to be building software. So very relevant. Thanks for sharing that. Been doing LeetCode for a month, but I feel like it just to get a job. Um, yes, it probably will just be to get a job. Yes, there's some direct work to work skills, but not really doing much. Should just concentrate on a passion app instead. Um, a mix. So I would say I highly recommend. Everyone's different, of course. Remember what I said at the beginning of this. Highly recommend, if you have time and capacity for it, build things on the side. I'll share a bit of an anecdote in just a moment. Should you drop the LeetCode? I don't think so. Like, especially if you have not landed a job and you're kind of planning to try and get towards that, I do think you'll want to have some LeetCode exposure. So at Microsoft, I'm a principal engineering manager. When I was transitioning, like, so when I got my like setting up for interviews, I started doing LeetCode every day for hours. As a principal engineering manager, right? I figured I'm gonna have at least one of my in big tech, multiple rounds of interviews, at least one of them is gonna be coding. And at least one of them is probably gonna feel like it's a LeetCode style question. I don't like those types of questions. I've been programming for 20 years now. At the time, it would have been, just over 15. And I still hate LeetCode style questions because I just don't think that they're applicable in most real life programming. Just at least from my experience throughout my career. So I think if you can do both, spend some time on LeetCode, especially leading up for your interviews. But if you can manage it, try to get a passion project. People ask, like, I don't know what to build. If you check out my website, if you check out my YouTube videos, go search for project ideas and stuff. I have some up. You can ask ChatGPT for ideas, right? The goal with your projects, I think a lot of people are like, oh, I need to have something super cool and flashy for my resume. I'm like, look, back up a little bit. You don't need anything that's going to make money. That's not the goal at all. So drop that entirely, unless you really want to focus on that. But if you're trying to land a job somewhere, don't try to make an app that's going to make you money. You don't need to do that. It might slow you down because you're stuck. Like, what's a good business idea? Like, that doesn't matter right now. So park that. Sometimes people are like, what's flashy? What's going to get attention? I think people have different opinions about this. This is where I'll share my hiring manager perspective is like, I literally don't care if your app even works. Sounds kind of funny. What I care about is that you spent time trying to go learn something, because if I see it on your resume and it's like, I tried building whatever, I just want to talk to you about it. Like, what did you try to build? Why did you try to build it? How far did you get? Where did you get stuck? Which technology did you pick? Did you go back and rebuild it? Did you refactor it? Why did you do that? That kind of stuff is super cool. And it's super cool because that's exactly what you're going to be doing when you're working. Right? Like that's the goal. You're going to be doing those things. So having the ability to have a conversation through that, I think, is super awesome. So that's why I think you should be building stuff. Curriculum. Yeah, university learning, this is something else I'll just kind of mention before kind of moving on here. This is probably the same going from elementary school to high school to post-secondary, right? At some part of that journey, you have to figure out how you learn, which sounds kind of ridiculous, but this is why I struggled in school, in university. I didn't know how I learned. I just got really lucky that along the way, I didn't have to worry about it. I didn't have to worry about it because whatever was being put in front of me, that was good enough that I could learn and do really well. As soon as university hit, I had information presented to me in a way that was not aligned how I learned, and I didn't know how to learn for myself. And it took me 5 years straight of university, because there was the internships in between, that finally, by the end, like my last 2 semesters, my marks were going up, finally. And it's because it took me that long to realize, like, me going to the lectures, the way this was set up, lectures made no sense for me. at all because I would go there and sleep. It's useless for me. So I had to make sure, like, I had to learn how to study. I had to learn how to take notes at home properly, all that kind of stuff. I had to force myself to practice because I never had to before. You have to learn how to learn. So, yeah, university, college, all that stuff will look different for different people. I do want to come back to this the senior to architect transition. So let's move along here. Um, the big point in this sort of second part of the article was really things like LeetCode might not be applicable as much. What was the other part here? Uh, yeah, like I think the even the system design stuff. I think that's probably the most relevant of the technical pieces that you practice going into it. Now, where this deviates, in my opinion, is if you're very junior. So if you happen to get like a system design question and you were practicing for it in your interview, right? Um, for context, in the last live stream I did and the last newsletter article before this one, I talked about these system design questions being purposefully open-ended. They're very vague in a lot of companies that give you these. And that's because they want to basically gauge if you're going to ask for requirements. If you just start building the system that they barely gave you any requirements for, it's probably not a great sign, because if you were working on a team and someone said we have this challenge, this problem space we have to go tackle, and you just say, cool, you disappear and go start building stuff, it's just not how software is built. Like, you're building it in teams. You need to be getting, the user feedback. Like, what are the requirements? You have to work with the other stakeholders depending on, the size and scale of your teams and stuff. There's probably people whose entire role is helping you figure that out. You're going to be working with the more senior software engineers, the architects, coming up with these ideas for how to go build these systems out. So just disappearing and going to code is probably not the best first step. So that's what I talked about in the last live stream, and tying it back to like a difference here. If you're a more junior engineer, right, odds are depending if it's a startup, maybe this is different, but if you're at a bigger company where there's more resources on the team, it's very likely that you're not going to be handed some work to do that's, hey, new employee that's very junior, I know this is your first job, but we need you to go basically go off and go build this big distributed system for us. See you in a week, see you in a month. Like it doesn't happen that way. I shouldn't say never, because I'm sure it does in some places, but statistically, it's probably pretty unlikely that's going to happen if you're more junior. What's probably more likely is that there's more senior people on the team that are leading projects like that, and you will be involved in them, right? You will have an opportunity to participate in the design discussions. That's great, but you're probably not in a position where you have to go make all those decisions completely on your own. So some of that lead up, getting to this point where you're practicing that for your interviews, that's where it's a little bit more artificial. So that's what I was trying to call out in the newsletter article. What would be interested in is, how does it look for the average junior developer to do Microsoft interview for software development? I'll see if I have time for this at the end. There's other creators, especially on LinkedIn. I think Jade Wilson, man, every time I live stream, I'm like, I forget people's names, and it's terrible because like I talk to these people pretty regularly. Jade at Microsoft has, it's like I'm saying that like there's only one Jade, right? If you're on LinkedIn, Jade Wilson, God, I hope I have her last name right. That's so embarrassing. She has really great content. I think she recently posted something about, how that's all set up. So I would recommend checking her out on LinkedIn. I think she also has a YouTube channel, but I don't know what the channel name is. If you search Jade Wilson Microsoft, probably she'll come up. She might have made a video on that as well. So if I don't get time to come back to that, I would follow up with that content. Okay. So moving along through this article, what's the next kind of section I wanted to talk about? So yeah, like the what do I focus on when I'm starting out, right? Again, this is pretty relevant for the early in career folks, because you're starting off and it's like, cool, got the job. What do I do? right? You have all these, if especially if you're following creators and stuff online, a lot of them, it's kind of hard to gauge because you'll see people saying, you want to be senior? Like, here's what you got to do. And I mean, there's really good advice that people are putting out. The challenge is that, I mean, you just started somewhere. Of course, you want to be senior. You want to be architect. You want to be manager. You want to be something more than where you're at. That's being aspirational. But that doesn't mean it's the first step you take. And I think that might be missing for some people. A good parallel to this that I like looking at for people that are into fitness and stuff. If you're not, sorry, this might not land very well. It's one of my passions on the side outside of software engineering. But if you are like, I want to get really big and muscular, or I want to be very strong, a mistake that people can make is they look at all of their heroes in this space, right? You'd look at Mr. Olympia. You'd say, Mr. Olympia, well, what does his workout look like? How much is he eating? Right? I want to be big like Mr. Olympia. So you're like, okay, well, what's his training? What's he eating? You go do all the research and you're like, okay, I'm going to dedicate myself. I'm going to do this. What you're missing is that's not how Mr. Olympia started working out. Mr. Olympia, you know, if they're walking, these guys are walking around at like some of them over 300 pounds in the off season. If you are not like that, it's probably not a good recipe to start at that point. You need to start somewhere a little bit sooner, right? So this is a really common question that people have, like, what do I start focusing on, right? I see some questions rolling, and let me finish a couple of thoughts here, and I'll scan the chat. So I think one of the first things, tempering this, right? This is like some of my personal expectations for folks. I always recommend to people, like, this is your time to ask questions, right? You should be asking questions throughout your career. You should be curious and questioning things. But especially right now, you are just starting out. You have all of the reason in the world to be asking questions. No one is expecting that you know anything about the domain you're in. That's cool. That means you get, like, I know it doesn't feel this way, but you should feel like you have a free pass to ask anything you want, right? You can ask all the dumb questions. There are no dumb questions for you. You're brand new. There should be never there should never be dumb questions for anyone, right? It should never feel that way. But especially in the beginning, you get this you should have this free pass kind of feel where you should ask things, right? And it's not just that I think you should be allowed to. I expect you to. If you are new on my team, I expect you to be asking questions. That is how you are going to learn. Now, one of the more complicated things, especially in more recent time, is that we're working remotely. I started at Microsoft Remote. I know that it feels challenging to reach out to people you've never met in person, and you're like, I gotta ask this person a question. Like, I hope I'm not bothering them, right? Now, I say that confidently because I have talked to so many people where this is like one of their number one concerns. Like, yeah, like I'm blocked on this. I didn't know what to do, but like, I didn't want to reach out to this person because I didn't want to bother them. No matter how many times I say it, I've had the individuals who are apparently going to be bothered say to the team, you can ask me anything you want anytime. I am happy to help. I have told these individuals, if you don't want to go bother that person because you think you're going to bother them, come bother me, right? Like, I want you to come ask questions. People feel very uncomfortable asking questions. At this point, it's a pretty big like mystery for me because I like to think I'm pretty approachable at work. I think other people have made themselves approachable, but I think the remote nature of work is making this very difficult for some personality types. So I try to hammer this home because I think that it's still a missed opportunity for people. So if you're watching this, listening to it, and you're going to be starting a new role, please try to ask questions, because if you are blocked on stuff where you don't have clarity, there's almost like no learning opportunity for you there, because this is another big area that's challenging for new folks, right? How much problem solving do I do on my own? versus asking for help. And one of the things that I try to call out for people is like, if you don't have clarity about what's being asked of you, you should go ask for clarity. You can't even take a next step if you don't know what's being asked of you. That's not even problem solving, right? You don't have enough information to start figuring out what to do. Get that cleared up. That's critical. Beyond that, I would say that there's this balance of like, go do a bit of exploration, right? I try to frame it like, if you think that other people on the team have solved this problem, you may not want to spend too much time. You should do some, not spend too much time though, because you're not going to be bringing back net new information for the whole team. Odds are someone can expedite this for you. If you want to balance this out really well, I would say get to a point where you've tried some things out. And that way, when you go to ask someone for help, try to have this in your mind. The first thing that someone should say to you is, what have you tried so far? If you feel like you cannot answer that, go do something, right? Go try something first, because you should feel confident when you go to ask for help. Anyone on the team, come to me, I'm your manager, and you're like, hey, I'm stuck on this. I'm going to say, what have you tried so far? Right? And if you've tried something and you're stuck, cool, let's chat through it. Let's see the pros and cons. Let's do the engineering part. Let's analyze things, right? Let's figure that out together. But if you've tried nothing, then I'm probably going to say, what do you think you should try? Right? So that's kind of how I would frame that for asking questions and trying to balance the how much do I do on my own versus get clarity. I'm going to check the chat here. I'm starting a new position as a mid-level senior developer. From your experience, what are some insights should I carry with me? Yeah, Sudi, if I'm saying your name correctly, this is a question that was asked a little bit earlier that I'm going to come back to a little bit. It's similar to senior developer going to software architect. I'll try to see if I can cover that. Practical tips to learn things that are actually practically useful in programming, or maybe somewhat like a roadmap. That's a very good question. Good topic. Imposter syndrome. Yes, I do have. I should get a guest on. I want to get Julia. Julia is a previous intern I had. They got me hooked on talking about imposter syndrome because it is so valuable. She's a great presenter. Mental note, get Julia on a call, get that recorded. I don't know if I'm going to have time to cover imposter syndrome in this chat. On the roadmap and practical things to do, that might be larger scope than this chat as well. So I'll review the notes for this and I'll try to see if I can come up with some follow-up, either live streams. Ali, if you have more specific questions about that, feel free to just rhyme them off in the chat. Send me a message on a different platform or comment it on YouTube somewhere if you want, if you don't want to put it in the chat. And I'll try to get a list and I can try to put some information together to respond. So yeah, we'll see if we can get to the point where we talk about like mid-level senior and kind of moving forward beyond that, because there's some common themes, I think. So I think another thing for getting started, right, is, and this is less applicable to just a junior engineer versus being new in a role. Like, one of the things that I want to see right away is that you are going from this this phase of like, you're obviously new, you haven't committed any code yet, you haven't gone through like the life cycle of committing features, bugs, like all the software delivery life cycle, right? You haven't gone through that yet. So the very beginning, I expect you got questions, you got to feel out how things work. This is different in every team, every company. Some places have a good system in place where you can get delivering features like right away. Awesome. Some places it's a little slower. The build that we have, and sorry, build team, I'm not harping on you, I promise. But the build that we have within Substrate takes time. Depending on what team you're on, you might have stuff come out faster, other teams slower. If you're not used to that because you come from a different, software development company, or you're new in industry and you're like, hey, I build code in Visual Studio on my desktop in 3 seconds, right? It's going to look different at different companies. but you have to go learn the tooling. Someone's got to show you the ropes of that. It will be different at different places. So what I expect is that you have questions in the beginning, and over time, you still have questions, but you have different questions, and you're becoming more autonomous. You're becoming more able to be effective at delivering. It doesn't mean that you know everything. But if I said, okay, here's another, bit of work to go focus on, let's, it's bug, feature, whatever it happens to be, you're getting into this groove of like, I trust that you know how to get your pull requests up, get your code reviewed, how to write your tests in the systems we use, how to roll out your changes, whether that's flighting, some other mechanism. You start to learn that, and I can trust that someone's not having to double check every single thing you're doing all the time. If you're more junior, I expect that takes longer. That's okay, right? Like if you're brand new to it, that's okay. You might have never used Git before. Cool. You have to learn it. That's fine. Some things will take more time. So again, the beginning, you're asking questions and you're getting to this point, especially if you're more junior, where the questions you're asking are allowing you to be, you're progressing with being more autonomous, but you're asking more questions about kind of what's coming up. That's what you're trying to build in the beginning. Because I think, again, if you jump to some of the content creator advice, I'm probably guilty of this too. I'm not trying to accuse other people of things. A lot of it's like, this is going to tie into the senior to architect stuff, but like, hey, impact, visibility. If you're brand new as a software developer, you're not getting a lot of say, most likely, in the impact and the visibility you're having. And that's probably because the work you're being given is more scoped down. At startups and smaller companies, that may not be the case. You might start getting way more visible stuff very soon. Even some teams at Microsoft, you'll get way more visibility on the stuff you're doing way sooner. But more generally speaking, this is the challenging part about advice, is that as someone more junior, the work you are going to be doing is less impactful, has less surface area. It's not to say it's not valuable. It's just that the scope of the impact is smaller. So if you are a junior developer going, I need the biggest high impact feature to go work on so that senior leadership can see it because I saw Nick make a post on LinkedIn that says, that's how you get to an architect role. It's just not what's likely going to be happening if you are brand new. So try not to jump the gun getting too far to these really advanced things when you kind of got to do the beginner stuff, and that's okay. The last part I put in my newsletter article is for like in this section is about getting to know your team. So again, some of the things we talk about in software engineering, you got these super technical skills, you got programming, software architecture, how to test, all important things. But this is your opportunity, especially if you are new in industry, right? If you haven't had a lot of opportunity to build software in teams, spend the time getting to know your colleagues. It doesn't mean you have to feel like family with everyone. I got very fortunate early. I was telling Anna Miller, who I did a call with earlier today, it's the most cliche thing, and I think a lot of people hate hearing this in software, but like the company I worked at before literally felt like family when I started there. I spent all of my time, outside of work with work people for years. It really did feel like family. So guilty. But I don't expect that of other people, right? You don't have to feel like family with me. I'm not trying to push that on you. I have my own wife. We got dogs. Like we got our own little family going on. We can be colleagues. You don't need to be in my family, but I do think it's very valuable to spend time getting to know your colleagues, right? You don't have to get into everyone's personal life, whatever you're comfortable with, whatever they're comfortable with, but figuring out what are they subject matter experts on, right? What do they have, technical knowledge? Like, what do they got going on? Trying to get a feel for that is extremely valuable because guess what's going to be happening as soon as you start working on stuff? You're going to have questions, and you need to go ask the right people the questions, right? You have to be communicating with people. So spend the time getting to know your teammates, figure out what they're experts in, And that way, when you start working on stuff, when you get stuck and you need help problem solving, you go, oh, I remember this person actually knows about this space. I should go talk with them. This person talks about testing a lot on the team. I'm stuck on the tests. I should go ask them. Oh, this person on the team deals with build stuff all of the time. My build isn't building. So, like, what do? I should go ask them. Go spend the time within your team getting to know your colleagues. As you become more advanced and you're doing work outside of your team, get to know your partner teams because that will help too. Depends on the size of the company and the organization that you're in. If it's Microsoft scale, I'm talking about even within Office 365 substrate, which is just a portion of Microsoft. There's so many people I will never get to meet all of them. So doing some networking is very valuable. Okay, I'm gonna come back to this point about the senior to architect piece because I think it's kind of relevant right now. So the idea at this point is that what I'm talking through is like, what are these things you should be focusing on if you're primarily if you're newer in career, but even if you're new to a team. Now, if you're not, and you're like, okay, I've been at this for a while, but I want to advance further. A lot of the things, this will tie into the next section as well. A lot of the things that you need to be doing are scaling up the different expectations that are had of you. I don't know if I said that properly. Speaking is really difficult. So what should you be doing? Well, to become more senior, there's probably some amount of mentorship or helping others that can look different in different ways, right? There's going to be the impact that you are having is greater. So you're working on features or business value that is greater in terms of the impact it has. The surface area of said impact is greater. So that might mean that you're interacting with other teams, working on projects that span multiple teams, right? And kind of all put together, especially at bigger companies, kind of sounds like it sucks. I'm not a huge fan of this concept, but it makes sense. Like the visibility needs to be there. So when I say visibility, the reason it sucks to kind of hear that is you're like, is it my responsibility to make sure that I'm like, hey, Satya, CEO of Microsoft, like, look at the work I'm doing, visibility. Like, no, that's not what I'm saying. But if you don't have visibility communicating, if you're working in group projects, let's say, right, you're working, and this is more common the more senior you are, you're working with across other teams. If you are never communicating your part of what's happening, when you go to talk to your manager, right, it's like, it's rewards time, or depending what company you're at. Microsoft, we have Connects. It's a good opportunity to talk with your manager about the things you're doing. If you're never communicating what you are doing specifically, you don't get visibility into the work you're doing. So you say, I worked on this really big project and it was very successful. Cool. Like, what did you do? 20 other people worked on it too, right? Like, what did you do? So you need to be able to have that type of visibility into what you're doing. So all of those things are valuable. Just checking the chat. Maybe you could share how you started in tech, maybe even go back to the internship days. I'll see if I can touch base on that. But going from senior to architect and that kind of thing, like basically growing in terms of the individual contributor role, right? A lot of the stuff is going to look like scaling up what you're already doing. So you will be in positions where you are, instead of committing to a part of a project, you're leading a project within the team, right? You have some of the more junior engineers that are working under you. It might be your design that you came up with, might be something you collaborated on for a design, but you're kind of leading some of that initiative, helping work with your PM or your manager to kind of split up that work and see how it can be done, taking some accountability for the success of that project. Going beyond that, it's not just within your team now. You're leading projects across teams. So you're collaborating either again on a design that's, say, mostly owned by your team and you have partner teams helping, or you're collaborating with partners on the design and again, trying to lead some of that initiative cross team. You just keep scaling this up, right? So it's not even just across team now, it's multiple teams. You are leading that entire effort. It just more and more scale. So that's the kind of thing that I think is important when you're trying to go from senior and beyond. The amount of influence you're having on teams, right? It's not just like, oh, you're helping out some folks on the team that are more junior. You are helping level up other people on different teams because you're spending time educating them about things, making sure that they're following best patterns and practices. You're helping establish some of those across teams. It's just the scale of the impact you're doing across the board keeps going up. So I know that probably sounds very generic, and that's because it is very generic advice, which leads us into this final part of what I wrote in my newsletter, which is talk to your manager. Sounds kind of funny, but if you think about that advice I just gave you about the senior to architect stuff, or even the stuff I mentioned before, if you're more junior getting into this, like, what did I say at the very beginning of this live stream? If you just joined, I'm sorry you don't know. Um, but it was, I'm not your manager, right? Here's all of this advice I just gave you from my experience, my perspective with my biases, but I am not your manager. So what you should not do is finish up this live stream, or if you're watching it, it's recorded, you're like, cool video, Nick, thanks for the tips. I'm going to go implement all of those. And then get frustrated when you don't get promoted when you expect. It's not what I want to have happen here. It's not what you want to have happen. So this is the thing you need to do. It's talk to your manager and get the aligned expectations about what you should be focused on. I gave you very generic guidelines. These are the types of things. I didn't say go work on this project specifically. I mean, I don't know what you're working on, so I can't, but even for people on my team, if anyone on my team or people that I've managed, if you're watching this and even if it's recorded, you're watching the recording, leave a comment if you're like, yep, Nick doesn't say go work on this project specifically, land this exact project. I don't like doing that because of the project deadlines and schedule have to be adjusted. I don't want you to be like, sorry, like no promotion for you because that project that we said is guaranteed tied to your promotion got delayed. Wait till next year. That's crap. That's not what I want. What I like doing is talking about what qualities, what traits, what focus areas that project helps support in terms of your career growth. Because if a project ever has to be delayed, canceled, anything else, you and I can still work as me as the manager, you as the individual contributor. We can work together on those focus areas and say, cool, that project was really helping elevate those things for you. It got delayed, got canceled, whatever it is. We know what those focus areas are. What's the next project, right? Does that project help check the boxes for those things? Can you get some exposure to that? If yes, great. If not, that's okay. What areas still need some focus? Can we find some opportunities for that? So that's what I like to do with my employees. I need to make sure that, yes, they're focused on the right business priorities, but the reason that engineering management is not a trivial, like, what's the highest priority? Just assign it to whoever's next. It doesn't work like that because people wouldn't grow effectively. The teams would not be effective. I'm not trying to say that I'm like saving the day here, but it's important to align the work to people's career growth as well. It's my responsibility as an engineering manager to help make sure that people are challenged, engaged in the work they're doing, they feel like they're learning, and they feel like they understand their career trajectory. Those things are critical for me to do. And the reason I bring up this section is that if you're not talking to your manager and you start following advice that anyone else gives you, blindly, let's say, right? Like someone who's really influential on the internet said this, you talk to a peer, they're super smart, they're successful, and you're like, they said, you got to do this. If you're not talking with your manager, like, who do you think puts you up for promotion? Like, who do you think is in the rewards conversations for you? Like, it's going to be your manager. So if you want to try and avoid being disappointed by having misaligned expectations, I think you need to spend time figuring out how to communicate with your manager effectively. Now, this is where it looks completely different again for everyone, because I'm not your manager. What I recommend doing is trying to bring this up in one-on-one conversation. So first of all, if you're not having one-on-ones, bring that up with your manager to say, I think it would be good if we could have some type of regular one-on-one, right? I think managers should be doing that personally, but I'm not every manager, so who knows? I think minimum every other week is like pretty necessary. If you can handle every week and your manager can, great. There's capacity for it. I think that's awesome. Then once you have that up and running, sometimes one-on-ones kind of fall into this, I don't want to call it a trap, but like, here's my status update, which I think you can include. There's benefit to that. But if you feel like, hey, look, the only conversations I have with my manager, even if they're once a week, all I'm doing is talking about the pull requests I have up, the tests I wrote, the time I broke the build and I fixed it. Like, while that's valuable to some degree to have an understanding of what's being worked on, what it's not doing is helping you understand what to focus on in your career for growth. So, what can you do about that? You can ask them. Now, this is my personal preference. If I'm having conversations like one-on-ones with people, I try to make sure that we're having career conversations, but if it's not happening regularly enough, something that I really appreciate is in a one-on-one, if someone's like, hey, like, I know we might not have had enough time for it today, but next time, do you think we could talk through career growth? And if you haven't done it in a while or you haven't done it ever, leaving it open-ended like career growth can be totally fine. But what I appreciate is like there's a bit of room for me to kind of prep myself. Sounds maybe kind of weird, but like I share with people like I'm very introverted. Hopefully I don't come across that way on video and stuff, but I'm very introverted. Conversations like that can be very they can take a lot of energy for me. If I'm put on the spot to be thinking up things, that can feel stressful and I feel like I can do it, but I feel like I'm not doing a good job of it. So I like saying to people, if you can give me a heads up, even if we have to schedule it the next day or something, like that's cool. Like I just need a bit of time so I can think through it so I can give you good answers. But I'm not your manager, so you need to work with your manager to figure out like what is an effective way that you can communicate with them, right? Find out what works when you're talking with your manager. And again, if you're having challenges with this, the thing that I need to remind you is like at the end of the day, like I believe it's a manager's responsibility to help grow you in your career. But truly, at the end of the day, the person that cares about your career growth the most is you. And you need to get in the driver's seat of your career growth. Because if you don't, you may find more often than you'd like, you are frustrated with not having aligned expectations, feeling like, hey, I thought I deserved this, but I didn't get it. So if you're being more proactive about it, you can start closing some of the gaps. That's not saying it's automatically going to propel you to, you're going to be CEO of the world, right? Right? It's not, it doesn't work like that. But if you're just sitting back and being idle, I think it's a bit of a recipe for disappointment. So that was a newsletter article. Just checking the chat again. Um, Shares. Okay. We're about at time. I wanted to go to 10:30. So for folks that aren't interested anymore, that was a newsletter. Thank you for watching. I'm gonna answer a couple of questions in the chat if you're still interested, want to hang around. So thank you folks in the chat for leaving questions. I apologize if you're on LinkedIn. I have no idea if there's a chat on LinkedIn. I haven't been on a LinkedIn live event, so I'm really sorry if people were like, Nick, what the hell are you doing? You're not answering our stuff. Same thing on Twitter. No, there is a chat on Twitter. I wrote in the chat, so okay. But yeah, on YouTube, We got some more questions here. So, share how you started out in tech. Maybe go back to intern days. Sure. So, University of Waterloo for engineering, at least when I was there, it's an honors program and it's a co-op program. What that means is that we had to maintain a certain grade average, and we had internships that were, it varied a little bit, but we basically had an internship every other semester. So school for 4 months, work for 4 months. So my months 4 to 8 for me at university were working. I had one semester of school before I was working. This actually, I forgot to say this earlier, and I said I was going to come back to it. So perfect timing. Side projects. So my philosophy for internships was I wanted to try working at startups, small companies, because I thought that would give me sort of the most value. I felt like if I worked at a big company, maybe I'd be kind of lost in the noise, a lot of stuff going on, not high impact. Who knows? So I started applying to startups and small companies, and I like this story because I think it's kind of cool, and I think it's speaks to side projects at least from my experience. I am a computer nerd by definition. Love being inside. I play video games all day if I could, but I also love to program, which is arguably even more nerdy. So, aside from playing video games all the time as a kid, I love to write games. But I was terrible at anything graphical. Like, I have no artistic abilities whatsoever. So, I liked making role playing games. So, you got swords, you got magic, you got all this fun stuff, but no graphics. Like, no way. I'm terrible at it. So I kept, and it's 20 years old and I still have code for it. I kept kind of rebuilding and refactoring this game that was, it kind of looked like Pokemon, but even worse, and kind of played like a terrible Diablo top down RPG, if you know what I'm talking about. But I had this game that I was kind of building on the side. It looked awful, but I kept building these really cool, complicated like game systems into it. I loved it. It was so much fun. And the one interview I had for my first internship, I remember it was really weird how it was framed, but because no one else was doing this, but the employer said, "Bring something for show and tell." Like, look, I just got to university. I'm terrified. I've never applied for a software job in my life. It's like week one because you have to apply for these jobs before you go for the internship, right? So we spent the first week writing resumes because none of us had done it. And then right after that, you're applying. So I'm like, this is the most terrifying experience of my life. And I can already tell, like, I'm going to start bombing classes. Like I said, I'm doing awful. Now I have to apply for jobs and I have to bring something for show and tell. And I was like, wait a second. I got the perfect thing. I've been making this ridiculous game. And then in my head, I was like, oh no, it looks so awful. I spent no time on the graphics, but I'm like, I got this game. I've been building this. I can bring this for show and tell. Yes. So go for this interview. I've never really interviewed for a software job, so no idea what to expect. And I remember him, okay, like, let's see what he brought for show and tell. So I pulled up I think I got to bring my laptop. I think I did, or I had to give it to him ahead of time. Anyway, we had a laptop pulled up. I pull up this game. It's got this terrible, like, music. It's like a 32-bit Pokemon looking RPG. I had like terrible, like, weather animations and stuff. I was like, look, like, you got weather, like your items change characteristics if it's raining. And I was like, this is so cool. I'm sure he was like, dude, what is this? But he asked me really interesting questions. He's like, so how do you have an inventory? How do you store the items for that? And I was like, oh, well, I don't know. Like, right now I think it was a CSV file, but I'm like, it's really not a good fit because the information is like hierarchical. So like, maybe I want to switch to XML or something, but like, I don't know. So it was cool that this was very much like a system design question, but on something I had written in way smaller scale. So that was really fun. And the reason I'm putting so much detail into this example is because I remember going on to the portal that we had for school, and I had an offer. And the way that it works is they rank you. So I had like you rank them and they rank you. So I had like a number one matching offer with them. And I was like, cool. Like I actually really like that company. I have an offer. And I remember talking to the owner. His name is Peter Hansen. Peter Hansen is a genius. I wish I spent more time trying to learn from Peter because he's amazing. Peter had said to me, "Were you surprised that I gave you the offer?" Like, I'm thinking about it. I'm like, I don't know. I actually don't think I'm surprised, not to sound cocky, but I thought the interview went well. Like I was pretty jazzed about how it went. I've never done one before, so I'm like, yeah, like I said, I don't really think so. Like I said, like I thought it went pretty well. Like not that I'm amazing, I just thought it went well. And he said, "Oh, interesting." He's like, "Because this is your first internship and that role was for basically for seniors." So I didn't even realize when I applied for it, it was not meant for first year students. So he said, "I thought you might be surprised that you got like a senior level, job offer for your first internship." So what's the moral of that? It's not that I make the world's best 2D games, because I don't. They look terrible, and I've been working on it for 20 years and it's not done. So definitely not the best games, but I think the point of this is that I personally was able to dedicate a lot of time to side projects. This is an example of a side project that was not finished, whatever it is now. Like it's been, how long have I been out of school? Too long. 12 years since I've been out of school, plus 5 years of being in school, 17 years. Okay, it's not done 17 years later. I used this to demonstrate what I had been learning, why I had been learning it, and it worked very, very well for an interview. It's a bit of a unique situation, but I just wanted to share with you. That was the value of doing the project, was that I got to practice learning these things. It was building real software, even if it was a crappy game. So I went back to work with Peter a second time, and Peter was also a University of Waterloo graduate. He had gone through engineering, and he gave me his Peter was full of advice, and like I said, I wish I wish I spent more time trying to like extract all this awesome value from Peter. Unfortunately, I did not, but I went back to work with Peter a second time, and the advice that he gave me was, look, like he's like, "I would love to have you back again for a third time." But he said, "I don't think that you should." He said, "You have all of these opportunities for your internships. You have 6 in total. You have 4 left now. I think it would be wise if you went and explored other things, because I don't want to say we're guaranteed jobs doing that internship program. You still have to put in the work, but like the system very much helps facilitate that for you. So if you're putting in the effort, I feel like it's kind of crappy to say guaranteed, especially now. That's really not fair for me to say. But they do a lot of guidance to help move you along. So it was kind of like, you should go explore, because this is probably the only time in your career that it's very easy to switch every 4 months to see if you like something. I thought that was great advice. So Peter was very awesome to work with. The next company I went to work for was building. I got to go build operating room software. I was the only software developer. Does that sound terrifying? Like maybe a little bit. But it was not operating room software that was like cutting people open. It was cameras. So it was like basically audio, video for operating rooms. And I got to be the only developer. It was a very different experience, but it was super cool. So I got to build everything from the ground up. I went back to that company a second time as well. That was really cool. And then my last 2 internships, I remember saying, okay, I've done the startups and this has been good. I've done the small companies, but I want to see, can I try something else, right? Peter said, try some different things. So I said, I'm going to try a bigger company. So I worked in London, Ontario at a company that makes ATM software, so banking machines. They built the software that would help you. The area I got to work on was designing software that allowed you to design the screens that go onto the ATM software, which is super cool because that gets used, whatever people are making gets used on all these bank machines. So that was a really fun experience, bigger company. Um, and then my final internship was not at a very big company, but I went to San Jose. So I experimented with going with something completely on the other side of the continent, living far from home in the like in a different country, right? I'm from Toronto area, Uxbridge, Ontario, for anyone that knows the area, probably not. But I live in Seattle now. But so I got to go to San Jose, and this was a startup. It's called Ion Grid. I think they got bought out like shortly after I left. But that was a super cool experience. We used Objective C, not a cool experience, but everyone in the leadership was basically like a ridiculously smart engineer. So the CEO and the CTO were like, I don't know if they're both serial entrepreneurs, but at least one of the two was for sure. Both brilliant engineers. And then my direct manager was like one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. His name is Gary King. When Gary speaks, it's like you know that he's brilliant and it doesn't matter what he's saying because the way that he speaks, you're like, this guy is super smart. You just know that he is. And he could obviously back it up. So Gary was awesome for helping me like learn more advanced topics in general. Like he really, that was the first internship I had where I started to feel like people were challenging me, which sounds kind of weird. Like Peter was great to work for. I definitely had challenges working with, at Peter's company. I was being challenged by things, but I think this was the first time where I had a manager that was seeing that I was putting code out and like kind of moving through it quickly. And I told someone this recently. I feel like I was maybe bothering Gary. I would turn to Gary and say, "Hey Gary, I'm done." And he'd go, "All right, here's the next bit of work. Explain it to me." Shortly, "Gary, I'm done." And I can remember him being like it felt like he was just frustrated. And he would turn and I remember it was kind of like, "Okay, you think you're wrapping up these work items so fast? Okay." And like I said, Gary's very, very smart. So I think Gary reached the point where he's like, look, I can keep giving this guy stuff and he's going to keep turning to me and saying, like, look, I'm done. So instead, Gary was like, okay, I need you to go implement a compression algorithm for I was doing annotations on some iPad software. And he's like, I need you to go do this compression algorithm to optimize how much data we're transferring when we're saving these annotations. It's like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, and this is where my brain falls apart. So he was talking about how the annotations that I'm drawing are geometric shapes and introduced me to these different compression algorithms because Gary was extremely smart and I was extremely not smart compared to Gary, and said, I need you to go implement these algorithms that can go do compression, and I need you to find out what the right compression ratio is so that we still have smooth lines, but we're minimizing the amount of data that gets sent. Now, I don't think Gary knew this at the time, but I knew this a little bit about myself from working and trying to make 2D games. Something that I struggle with my entire programming career is that for whatever reason, my brain turns off when I need to be mapping coordinates with programming. I don't know why. I can't take a 2D, especially 3D, like forget it. Mapping a 2D space and trying to do like different like world coordinates almost, if I can call it that, mapping two different 2D spaces. My brain does not work. So I remember Gary telling me to do this, and I'm not gonna curse on the YouTubes, but I remember being like, oh, like I don't know what I'm gonna do. So I think working at that company, having someone like Gary, I can't remember Ben's last name, but Nick Triantos, Gary King, and Ben, I can't remember Ben's last name. Just amazing leadership there. So my internships were very much across a different spectrum of companies, mostly pretty small. And I think that really helped me Just work on impactful things. I'm going to wrap this up because I'm way over time. So thanks for folks that are still on here. But one of the things that I have mentioned on social media before is that I am the kind of person that does not like trying new things because I get very anxious about being new at it. I don't like feeling like I'm going to be underperforming. I like feeling like I'm an expert. That's what I want. And as a result, I rarely take risks to go put myself into a situation where I feel like I'm very new. It's not good. But what I've noticed repeatedly through my career is that every time I'm forced into a new situation, right? So I worked for Peter. I did embedded software for a needleless injector for farm animals. Then I worked on operating room software. Then I worked on ATM software. Then I worked on iPad software in a language I've never used before. After that, I went to go work for a digital forensics company for 8 years. Guess how much digital forensics I had ever done in my life before that? Then I went to Microsoft and I worked on a deployment team that deploys things to hundreds of thousands of machines across the world. Guess how much deployment experience I had? And now I work on a routing team at Microsoft, and guess how much routing experience I have? The answer to all of that is zero. So all of these things were forcing functions that put me into a position where I was completely new. I would never on my own, unfortunately, I wish I was better at this, I would never put myself into those situations by choice, right? I wouldn't go, hey, like tomorrow I'm going to go, I want to learn a little bit more Rust, and this is the problem. I'm not forcing myself to do it. As a result, I don't learn those things. When I'm forced into it, I learn. So my recommendation for folks as a little parting gift is like, don't be afraid to get exposed to things where you are a complete newbie. Stick with it. Building expertise in anything takes time and practice. So you just have to stick with it. Okay, just checking the chat. Thanks, folks. I do appreciate all the comments. I hope this was helpful. I didn't even put in advertisements for my course or anything. I got Dome Train courses. If you want to learn C#, I'll throw it in at the end. I got to get better at this kind of stuff. But no, thank you for watching. If you thought this kind of thing was valuable, depending on what platform you're watching it on, send me a message, leave me comments and stuff if there's other things you want to hear about. I think even on YouTube, there's some questions that came in I might not have touched on, so I apologize, but I will try to follow up. I am planning on doing these every single Monday, 9:30, until I come up with a better and or different cadence for them. So, yeah, I will hopefully see you next week if you like this. So thanks again, and take care.